The city was a blizzard of manufactured joy. Lights blinked in frantic, festive rhythms against the bruised twilight sky, and the air, thick with the scent of roasted chestnuts and damp wool, carried the distant chime of carols. Julian Vance stood apart from it all, a statue carved from ice and expensive cashmere. He was a man insulated by wealth, yet the cold seeped through the layers of his tailored overcoat and settled deep in his bones. It was a familiar cold, one that had nothing to do with the December air. He watched families hurry past, their laughter leaving small white puffs in the air, their arms laden with brightly wrapped packages. They were heading home. He was heading away. His private car was minutes away, ready to ferry him to an even more private jet, which would then deliver him to the ultimate isolation of his mountain cabin. It was a ritual he had perfected over the past 5 years. On the anniversary of his world ending, he meticulously unmade it, retreating from every sight and sound of a happiness he could no longer access. His gloved hand tightened around the small, velvet-wrapped box in his pocket. It was always with him on this day. The gift he never gave. Its sharp corners were a constant, physical reminder of a promise he could not keep, of a future that had dissolved into a phantom limb, an ache for something that was no longer there. The box contained a simple silver locket engraved with a single star. For Sarah. His star. He glanced at his watch. The sleek silver face, a stark contrast to the growing darkness. The car was late. A flicker of irritation, hot and quick, was instantly smothered by the familiar, heavy blanket of apathy. It did not matter. Nothing truly mattered. Time was just something to be endured now, a river of empty moments he had to cross to get to the end. A few yards away, huddled under the flimsy awning of a bus stop, a woman and a small child stood waiting. They were a small island of stillness in the rushing tide of commuters. The woman, Ilara, pulled the thin lapels of her coat tighter, her breath a plume of white in the frigid air. The fabric was worn, the color faded from a once vibrant blue to the muted gray of a winter sky. It offered little protection against the biting wind that whipped around the corner, carrying with it the first lazy flakes of snow. She shivered, a tremor that ran through her entire body, but her focus was entirely on the small boy beside her. She tucked the end of a brightly colored, hand-knitted scarf more securely around his neck, her fingers lingering on his rosy cheek. "Are you warm enough, my little lion?" she whispered, her voice soft. Leo nodded, his face half buried in the woolen fabric. "I'm okay, Mama, but your nose is red." He looked up at her with wide, serious eyes, the color of warm chocolate. He saw everything. He felt everything. He saw the way her hands trembled, the way she tried to hide her shivers so he would not worry. He saw the faint, blue tinge of her lips. The bus was late. Again. Ilara checked the digital timetable on the shelter's wall, its red numbers flickering erratically. Another 10 minutes, it claimed. 10 minutes felt like an eternity. She could feel the cold seeping into her worn boots, a creeping numbness that was starting to feel painful. She had spent her last few dollars on a special art kit for Leo's Christmas gift, a foolish but necessary expense. The joy it would bring him was worth a week of thin soup and cold toes. She just had to endure. Leo's gaze drifted from his mother's face to the tall man standing alone nearby. The man was like a figure from one of his storybooks, a lonely king, maybe, or a giant, who lived in a castle of glass. He wore a dark coat that looked impossibly warm, thick and soft like a shadow. He was not shivering at all. He looked still and sad, is it like a statue in the park after it rained. He saw the man's gloved hand resting in his pocket, a strange, rigid shape beneath the fabric. He saw the emptiness in the man's eyes as he stared at the joyful chaos of the street. But, most of all, he saw the contrast. The man was warm. His mama was cold. In Leo's 6-year-old world, the logic was simple and absolute. Problems existed to be solved. He tugged on his mother's hand. "Mama," he said, his voice muffled by the scarf. Yes, your sweetie? Ilara looked down, trying to conjure a smile that felt brittle on her frozen lips. My scarf is warm, he stated, a matter-of-fact observation. You should have it. He began to unwind it from his neck. No, no, Leo, she said quickly, her heart aching with a fierce, protective love. You keep it. I am perfectly fine. The bus will be here soon, and it will be warm as toast. It was a lie, but a necessary one. Her comfort was a luxury. His was a necessity. Leo stopped, his small brow furrowed in concentration. He accepted her words, but did not believe them. He looked back at the tall, warm man. An idea, pure and simple, bloomed in his mind. He let go of his mother's hand. Before Ilara could react, he walked across the few feet of slush-covered pavement that separated their world from the man's. He stopped just before him, craning his neck to look up at the stranger's impassive face. Julian felt a small presence at his side and looked down, his thoughts disturbed. A little boy, bundled in a rainbow scarf, was staring up at him with an unnerving intensity. Julian's first instinct was to step away, to re-establish the perimeter of his solitude. Children were part of the world he was actively escaping, noisy, unpredictable, full of a life that felt like a reproach to his own emptiness. But he did not move. There was something in the boy's gaze, a profound seriousness that held him in place. Leo shivered, a small, involuntary tremor that had nothing to do with his own warmth and everything to do with his mother's lack of it. He pointed a small mittened hand toward Ilara, who was now frozen in a state of horrified panic. Sir, Leo said, his voice clear and steady, my mum is cold. The words, simple and direct, struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. They bypassed the intricate defenses he had spent years constructing and landed directly in the hollow space in his chest. He looked from the boy to the woman. He saw her then, truly saw her. He saw the inadequate coat, the shiver she could not control, the fierce, protective love in her eyes as she started toward them. She was cold. It was a simple, observable fact, and for the first time in 5 years, a simple, observable fact moved him. Leo, no! I am so sorry. Ilara's voice was breathless as she rushed forward, grabbing her son's shoulder gently. You must not bother people. I am so sorry, sir. Her face was flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and cold. Julian looked at her, his expression unreadable. The carefully maintained mask of indifference was still there, but behind it, something had cracked. He saw the weary lines around her eyes, the quiet dignity in her posture. He saw a mother trying to be strong for her son in a world that was clearly not making it easy. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was his driver. The car was here. His escape was waiting. He could nod curtly, turn and walk away. He could get in the car and leave this small, cold scene behind, erasing it from his memory as easily as wiping condensation from a window. It was what he was supposed to do. It was what the Julian of the last 5 years would have done, without a second thought. But the boy's words echoed in his head. My mum is cold. A problem stated. A plea, though it was not intended as one. He made a decision. It felt like turning a key in a lock that had been rusted shut for a very long time. He ignored the vibrating phone. He looked at Ilara, then at the boy. The bus seems to be late, he said, his voice raspy from disuse. Ilara blinked, surprised by his calm tone. Yes, it is. We will be fine. She was already pulling Leo back, ready to melt back into the anonymity of the crowd. No, Julian said. The word was quiet but held an unexpected weight. He looked at Leo. Your mother is cold. He was not asking. He was agreeing. He then looked back at Ilara. My car is here. Allow me to give you a ride. The offer hung in the air between them, shimmering with impossibility. Ilara stared at him, suspicion warring with a desperate bone-deep weariness. People like him did not offer rides to people like her. Their worlds did not intersect. "Oh no, we couldn't possibly. That is very kind, but we will wait for the bus." "The bus is unreliable," Julian stated. "The cold is not. Please." He gestured to the sleek black sedan that had just pulled up to the curb, its engine a low, powerful hum. The back door opened, pushed from within by a uniformed driver. Warm, golden light spilled out onto the wet pavement. It looked like a portal to another world. Leo looked from the warm, waiting car to his mother's uncertain face. "Please, Mama," he whispered. "It's so warm." That was what decided it, the quiet plea in her son's voice. Ilara looked at the stranger one last time, searching his face for any sign of ill intent. She found none. She saw only a profound stillness, a deep-seated sadness that seemed, for a moment, to have been pushed aside by a simple, human impulse. She gave a small, hesitant nod. "Okay, thank you." Julian led them to the car, his hand hovering near Leo's back without actually touching him. He directed his driver to handle his luggage, then spoke into his phone, his voice crisp and authoritative. "Martha, cancel the flight. I am staying in the city. Something has come up." He listened for a moment, his face impassive. "No, I am fine. I will call you in the morning." He ended the call and slid into the plush leather seat opposite Ilara and Leo. The door closed with a soft, solid thud, sealing them in. The noise of the city instantly vanished, replaced by a cocoon of profound silence and warmth. The air smelled of leather and something clean and subtle, like rain on stone. Ilara sank back into the seat, a sigh of relief escaping her lips as the warmth enveloped her. It was more than just physical heat. It was a release of tension she had not even been aware she was holding. Leo pressed his face against the window, watching the snowy street slide by, his eyes wide with wonder. "Where do you live?" Julian asked, his voice softer in the confines of the car. Ilara gave him her address, a modest apartment building on the other side of town. It felt strange to say it aloud in such a luxurious setting, like confessing a secret. She felt a sudden wave of self-consciousness, acutely aware of her worn coat and the scuff marks on her boots. She glanced at him, expecting to see a flicker of judgment, but his expression remained neutral. The silence stretched, comfortable, rather than awkward. Julian watched the city lights blur past the window, but his thoughts were not on his cancelled trip or the solitude he had been craving. They were on the small boy beside him, who was now humming a quiet, tuneless song, and the woman opposite him, who was slowly, visibly, thawing. The crack inside him, the one Leo's words had made, seemed to be widening, letting in a sliver of unexpected light. "You are not going home for Christmas." Leo's voice cut through the quiet hum of the car. He had turned from the window to look at Julian, his head tilted curiously. Ilara's eyes widened. "Leo, that is not a polite question." "It is all right," Julian said, his gaze meeting Leo's. "No, I am not." "Why not?" Leo pressed, his innocence a shield against social convention. "Christmas is for being home with family." Julian felt the old, familiar tightness in his chest. The velvet box in his pocket felt impossibly heavy. "I do not have a family to go home to," he said, the words tasting like ash. It was the simplest, most honest thing he had said to anyone in years. Leo considered this with grave seriousness. His eyes drifted to his mother, then back to Julian. He seemed to be weighing a great and important matter. Finally, he gave a small nod, as if he had reached a conclusion. "Oh," he said softly, "that is a very sad thing." He did not offer pity or platitudes. He just stated the truth as he saw it. For the second time that evening, the child's simple honesty disarmed Julian completely. He felt the sting of unshed tears behind his eyes, a sensation so foreign he barely recognized it. He simply nodded, unable to speak. When they arrived at her building, the driver opened the door for them. The cold air felt like a shock after the warmth of the car. Ilara gathered her things, her mind racing. She could not just say thank you and disappear. The kindness he had shown them felt too significant for a simple dismissal. I cannot thank you enough, she said, turning to face him as he stepped out of the car. You did not have to do that. It was nothing, Julian replied, though they both knew it was not. Would you let me buy you a coffee sometime? To thank you properly? The words tumbled out before she could stop them, bold and perhaps foolish. Julian looked at her, at the earnest hope in her face, and then at Leo, who was watching him with wide, expectant eyes. The thought of returning to his empty, silent penthouse was suddenly unbearable. The solitude he had so carefully curated now felt like a punishment. There is a cafe a few blocks from here, he said, the idea forming as he spoke. It is warm, and they have the best hot chocolate in the city. Would you and Leo like to join me now? Ilara's heart gave a little leap. Now, yes, Julian said, a flicker of something almost like a smile touching his lips. I find my plans for the evening have unexpectedly cleared. The cafe was a pocket of warmth and light, smelling of cinnamon, coffee, and melting sugar. It was small and cozy, with mismatched wooden chairs and soft golden lighting that made everyone look kinder. They found a small booth in the corner, a little world unto themselves. Julian helped Ilara out of her coat, his touch light and impersonal. Yet the simple gesture felt profoundly gentle. Leo was mesmerized by the mountain of whipped cream on his hot chocolate, his small face a mask of pure bliss. He tackled it with a tiny spoon, his earlier solemnity replaced by a childish delight that was infectious. Ilara watched him, a real warm smile finally reaching her eyes. Thank you, she said again, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. This is lovely. You are welcome, Julian said. He was drinking black coffee, his hands cradling the mug as if for warmth, though the cafe was anything but cold. He looked different here. Away from the harsh street lights and the imposing car, the stern lines of his face seemed to soften in the gentle light. Looked less like a corporate titan and more like a man carrying a heavy, invisible weight. My son, Ilara began, feeling the need to explain. He's very direct. He does not have much of a filter. His directness is refreshing, Julian admitted. Honesty is a rare commodity. He watched Leo carefully lick a dollop of whipped cream from his spoon. A ghost of a memory surfaced. Another time, another place, laughing with Sarah over a shared dessert, her face alight with joy. He pushed it down, the familiar ache returning. What do you do? He asked, changing the subject, steering the conversation away from the dangerous territory of his own thoughts. I am a freelance illustrator, she said. Mostly children's books, when I can get the work. It is not always easy, but I love it. I get to create whole worlds. She spoke about her work with a quiet passion that animated her features, and Julian found himself listening, truly listening. He learned that she saw the world in palettes and textures, that she believed every shadow held a story. In turn, she learned almost nothing about him. He spoke of his work in vague, dismissive terms. Investments. Technology. He was a master of deflection, expertly steering the conversation back to her whenever it veered too close to his own life. Yet, in his silences, she learned more than his words could say. She saw the flicker of pain in his eyes when he looked at a happy family at a nearby table. She noticed the way he held his coffee mug with both hands, as if anchoring himself to the present moment. Leo, having conquered his mountain of cream, slid out of the booth and padded over to a small, sad-looking Christmas tree in the corner. It was sparsely decorated, with a few lonely-looking ornaments. He gently touched a silver bauble, his reflection staring back at him. Small and distorted, he turned and walked back to their table, his expression once again serious. He looked directly at Julian. "Your eyes are sad," he said, with the simple finality of a doctor delivering a diagnosis. Like the tree. Ilara gasped softly, mortified. "Leo, that is enough." "But Julian held up a hand, stopping her. He looked at the boy, his carefully constructed walls crumbling under the gentle assault of a child's perception. He could not lie to him. He could not deflect. "Yes," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "They are." It was a confession, a surrender. In that small, warm cafe, surrounded by the scent of cinnamon and the murmur of quiet conversations, Julian Vance admitted a truth he had not spoken aloud in 5 years, and he did not feel weaker for it. He felt seen. The days that followed fell into a strange, new rhythm. Julian did not go to his cabin. He stayed in the city, in the penthouse that had for so long been his silent, gilded cage. But it was no longer silent. He found reasons, however flimsy, to see Ilara and Leo. He claimed he needed an illustrator for a charity project his company was sponsoring. It was a lie. The project was real, but the illustrator had already been chosen. He gave the job to Ilara anyway. He would meet her in coffee shops to discuss concepts and sketches, though they spent more time talking about books and colors and Leo's latest obsession with, dinosaurs. He learned that her favorite color was the deep, velvety blue of the sky just after sunset. She learned that he preferred silence to music, but that he would sometimes hum a fragment of a classical melody when he thought no one was listening. He began to join them on their trips to the park. He would watch Leo charge at pigeons with fearless joy, his rainbow scarf trailing behind him like a banner. Julian would stand beside Ilara on the cold ground, their shoulders not quite touching, and, for the first time in years, he felt the chill of the winter air without the accompanying chill in his soul. He was just a man in a park, watching a little boy play. The simplicity of it was breathtaking. One afternoon, as snow fell in thick, silent flakes, they sat on a bench while Leo built a lopsided snowman. Ilara was sketching in her notepad, her fingers moving with practiced grace. "What are you drawing?" Julian asked, his voice low. "Just the trees," she said, not looking up. "I like how the snow gives them new shapes. It is like they are wearing white coats." He watched her for a moment, the way the tip of her tongue poked out in concentration. He felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling so unfamiliar he almost did not recognize it as happiness. It was fragile, tentative, but it was there. "Why did you cancel your trip?" she asked suddenly, her eyes still on her drawing. The question was soft, but it landed with precision. Julian looked out at the snow-covered park. He thought of the empty cabin, the roaring fire he would have built for one, the silence that would have screamed with memories. "I realized," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "that solitude is not the same as peace." Ilara finally looked up, her gaze meeting his. She did not press for more. She simply nodded, a universe of understanding in that small gesture. She knew about loss. She had her own quiet sorrows. The story of a husband who had left when Leo was just a baby, unable to handle the weight of fatherhood. They were two people who understood the language of what was left unsaid. The true turning point came a week before Christmas. Julian had invited them to his penthouse for dinner. He had the meal catered from a fine restaurant, but the sterile perfection of his home felt all wrong. It was a museum of a life, not a place where one was lived. The vast white walls were bare, the furniture was stark and architectural, and the silence was absolute. Leo, unbothered by the austere surroundings, explored with wide-eyed curiosity. He found his way into Julian's study, a room Julian himself rarely entered. It was the one place where Sarah's memory was allowed to exist. Her favorite books were on the shelves. Her reading glasses lay on the desk beside a stack of old letters, and on the mantelpiece was a single, silver-framed photograph. It showed a smiling, vibrant woman with eyes that sparkled with life. Julian found Leo standing on his tiptoes, staring up at the photograph. A cold dread seized him. "Leo," he said, his voice sharper than he intended, "do not touch that." Leo pulled his hand back, as if burned. He looked at Julian, his lower lip trembling. "Is she a princess?" he asked in a small voice. Julian's anger dissolved, replaced by a wave of grief so powerful it almost buckled his knees. He walked over and stood beside the small boy, his gaze fixed on the smiling face in the frame. "Yes," he whispered. "She was." Ilara appeared in the doorway, her expression soft with concern. She had heard the sharpness in his tone. She saw him standing there, rigid with pain, and she saw her son looking up at him, his small face a mirror of confusion and sadness. "That was Sarah," Julian said, his voice thick. "My wife." He finally turned to face Ilara, the mask completely gone. His face was a landscape of raw, unguarded sorrow. "There was a car accident 5 years ago, on Christmas Eve. We were expecting a child." The words fell into the silent room, heavy and final. Ilara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears, not of pity, but of a deep, shared humanity. She walked over to him, not to offer empty platitudes, but to simply stand with him in his pain. She placed a gentle hand on his arm. The contact was electric, a current of warmth against his frozen skin. "She is very beautiful," Ilara said softly, her eyes on the photograph. Julian could only nod, his throat too tight to speak. He felt Leo's small hand slip into his own. The boy's grip was surprisingly strong, an anchor in the storm of his grief. "Is she a star now?" Leo asked, his voice filled with a child's simple faith in magic. "Mama says all the best people become stars so they can watch over us." Julian looked down at the boy, and for the first time he saw not just a child, but a tiny wise sage. He managed a broken smile. "Yes, Leo," he said, his voice cracking. "She is the brightest star in the sky." In his pocket, his fingers found the velvet box, its corners no longer feeling so sharp. The confession changed everything. The last of Julian's walls had come down, and in the space they left behind, something new began to grow. The days leading up to Christmas were filled with a quiet, joyful domesticity he had never imagined he would experience again. They decorated the sad little tree in the cafe, adding new, bright ornaments. They baked cookies in Ilara's tiny, warm kitchen, covering themselves and every available surface in flour. Julian, the formidable CEO, found himself on his hands and knees, helping Leo build an elaborate castle out of cushions. He laughed, a real, deep laugh that felt rusty but wonderful. He began to feel like he was breathing again. After years of holding his breath, the world, which had seemed so grey and muted, was slowly regaining its colour, saturated by Ilara's quiet grace and Leo's boundless joy. He was not just observing life anymore. He was part of it. The ultimate test, though he did not see it as such at the time, was the annual Vance Industries Holiday Gala. For years, he had made a brief perfunctory appearance, a ghost at his own feast, before retreating back into his solitude. This year, he wanted to do something different. He wanted Ilara and Leo to be there with him. "It is a stuffy corporate event," he warned her, a hint of apology in his voice. "You will be bored to tears." "We will not," Ilara said, her eyes sparkling. "Leo has never seen a real ballroom. It will be an adventure." And it was. The ballroom was a fantasy of crystal and gold, filled with men in sharp tuxedos and women in glittering gowns. Julian, in his perfectly tailored suit, looked every inch the king of this castle. But tonight, he was not alone. He held Ilara's hand as they entered, and Leo walked between them, his eyes as wide as saucers. Ilara wore a simple, elegant blue dress she had found at a second-hand store. In the sea of designer labels, she should have looked out of place, but she did not. She radiated a warmth and a quiet confidence that outshone all the diamonds in the room. Julian felt in a surge of pride, a fierce possessiveness that startled him. He wanted to show her to the world. He wanted the world to see her as he did. For the first hour, everything was perfect. He introduced her to his colleagues, his voice steady and proud. He danced with her, a slow, graceful waltz, and for those few minutes, the rest of the room faded away. There was only the music and the feel of her in his arms, a perfect, comforting weight. He felt Leo tug on his trousers, and he swept the little boy up into his arms, the three of them swaying together in their own small, perfect circle. It felt like a dream. But dreams can turn into nightmares in an instant. He was getting them drinks when he saw them. Mark Renshaw, his chief legal counsel, was standing with his family near the enormous, glittering Christmas tree. Mark's wife, radiant in red, was laughing at something their daughter, a little girl about Leo's age with blonde curls, had said. Mark reached down and swung his daughter into his arms, planting a kiss on her forehead. The picture was one of effortless, complete happiness. It was a perfect family. It was the life he was supposed to have. The image struck Julian with the force of a physical impact. The air left his lungs. The ballroom, with its laughter and music, suddenly felt suffocating. The light, too bright. The sounds too loud. The grief he thought he had begun to tame rose up like a tidal wave, vicious and overwhelming. He saw Sarah's face, heard her laugh, felt the phantom kick of a child he never got to hold. He was an imposter, a fraud. He was playing house, pretending to be a father, a partner, when all he really was a ghost, haunted by a life that was not his. What was he doing? Pulling Alara and Leo into his world of shadows. They deserved a son, not the cold, empty space left by a dead star. He was broken, and he would only end up breaking them too. The panic was a cold, constricting band around his chest. He had to get out. He had to push them away, back to safety, before his darkness tainted their light. He walked back to Alara, his face a grim, unreadable mask. The warmth was gone, replaced by the familiar, icy stillness. "We're leaving," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Alara's smile faltered. "Is everything all right, Julian?" "I am calling my driver. He will take you home." He did not look at her. He could not. The abruptness of it was a slap in the face. "Take us home." "What about you?" she asked, confusion turning to a cold knot of dread in her stomach. "I am staying," he said curtly. This was a mistake. The words hung in the air, brutal and final. A mistake. Was he talking about the party, or was he talking about them? Ilara's heart fractured. She looked at his face, searching for the man who had laughed with her in the kitchen, the man who had confessed his sorrow in the quiet of his study. He was gone. In his place was the cold, distant stranger from the bus stop. She did not argue. Her own pride, a fierce and wounded thing, would not let her. She simply nodded, her expression numb. She took Leo's hand, her touch more firm than usual. "Come on, sweetie. It is time to go." Leo looked from his mother's pale, hurt face to Julian's closed-off one. He did not understand what had happened, but he felt the sudden, jarring shift in the air. The warmth was gone, replaced by a terrible, biting cold. "Are you not coming with us?" he asked Julian, his voice small. Julian finally looked at him, and his eyes were full of a pain so deep it was terrifying. "No," he said, and turned away. The ride home was silent. Ilara stared out the window, unseeing, as tears streamed down her face. She felt foolish. She had allowed herself to hope, to believe in a fairy tale, a wealthy CEO and a struggling artist. It was a fantasy. She had let her guard down, and now she was paying the price. The pain of it was sharp and suffocating. Julian remained at the gala for another hour, moving through the crowd like an automaton. He accepted congratulations on a successful year, shook hands, and smiled a smile that did not reach his cold, dead eyes. He was playing his part, the wounded executive back in his natural habitat of splendid isolation. Every laugh, every toast, every glittering light felt like an accusation. When he finally returned to his penthouse, the silence was a physical presence. It mocked him. The lingering scent of the cookies they had baked felt like a ghost. He walked into his study and stared at Sarah's picture. "I cannot do it," He whispered to the smiling face, "I cannot replace you. I cannot risk that pain again." He spent the next 2 days in a self-imposed prison of grief and regret. He did not answer his phone. He did not eat. He just sat in the dark, letting the memories he had tried so hard to keep at bay wash over him, drowning him. He told himself he had done the right thing. He had protected Ilara and Leo from his own brokenness. It was a noble sacrifice, but it felt like self-destruction. On the third morning, his assistant, Martha, let herself into the apartment with her own key. She was a kind, no-nonsense woman who had been with him for over a decade, one of the few people who had known him before the accident. She found him in the study, unshaven and hollow-eyed, staring at the wall. She did not scold him. She simply placed a steaming mug of coffee on the desk and opened the blinds, letting the pale winter sunlight stream into the room. "You have a delivery," she said softly. She handed him a large, simple manila envelope. His name was not on it. Instead, Ilara had written, "For the Sad King." His heart clenched. His hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, there was no letter, no angry words, no pleas. There was only a single piece of paper. It was a drawing from Leo. It was done in bright, cheerful crayon. It depicted 3 stick figures. One was a woman with wild, curly brown hair and a blue dress, Ilara. One was a small boy with a rainbow scarf, Leo. And standing between them, holding both of their hands, was a very tall man in a dark coat, but his coat was not black. Leo had colored it a deep, hopeful green, the color of new leaves in spring. And above their heads, Leo had drawn a giant, smiling yellow sun, its rays reaching down to touch all 3 of them. At the bottom, in a child's wobbly, earnest script, were 2 words, "Our family." The drawing fell from Julian's numb fingers. A sound escaped his throat, a raw, ragged sob that tore its way out of the hollow place in his chest. It was not a drawing of a replacement family. It was a drawing of a new one. It was not about erasing the past, but about building a future. Leo was not asking him to forget his star. He was asking him to come into the sun. He had been so consumed by his fear of repeating the past that he had failed to see the beautiful, fragile present being offered to him. He had not been protecting them. He had been starving himself of the very things he needed to heal: love, warmth, and hope. The pain of losing Sarah would never go away, but a life without Ilara and Leo, that was a different kind of death. It was a choice, and he was choosing wrong. He looked at Martha, his eyes wild with a sudden, desperate clarity. "I have to go," he said, his voice hoarse. "I have made a terrible mistake." He did not bother to shave or change. He threw on his coat and ran from the apartment, leaving Martha smiling faintly behind him. He did not take his car. He ran through the cold city streets, his lungs burning, his heart pounding with a terror that was far greater than his fear of grief. It was the fear of losing everything that had just begun to matter. He reached her apartment building, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his mind chanting a single, desperate prayer. "Please be there. Please do not be gone." He knocked on her door, his knuckles rapping hard against the wood. He waited, his entire future hanging in the balance of the next few seconds. The door opened. Ilara stood there, her face pale and etched with sleepless nights. She was wearing an old sweatshirt, and her eyes were red-rimmed. Behind her, he could see a half-packed cardboard box. The sight of it sent a spear of pure ice through his heart. "Julian," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do not go," he blurted out, the words raw and desperate. "Please do not go." He looked past her at the boxes. "I am so sorry, Ilara. I was a fool, a coward. What I said, what I did at the party, it had nothing to do with you. It was all me, my fear, my past." He took a shaky breath, his eyes pleading with hers. "For 5 years I have been living in the wreckage of my old life. I thought that was all I deserved. I thought I had to be alone to honor what I lost. And then, you and Leo, you walked into my life, and you did not just bring light into the darkness. You showed me that the darkness does not have to be the end of the story." Tears were streaming down his face now. hot and cleansing. He did not bother to wipe them away. "I was terrified," he confessed, his voice breaking. "Seeing that family, it was like seeing the ghost of the life I was supposed to have. And I panicked. I thought pushing you away would protect you from my ghosts, but all it did was create a new one. The ghost of a life with you and Leo. And that is a ghost I cannot live with." He stepped closer, his hands reaching for hers, stopping just short of touching her. "I am not asking you to help me forget my past. I am asking you to be my future. I love you, Alara, and I love your son. Please, give me another chance to be the man you both deserve." Alara had been listening, her own tears falling silently. She saw the truth of his words in his shattered expression, in the raw vulnerability he was offering her like a sacred gift. She saw the man she had fallen for, the sad king who just needed someone to show him he could build a new kingdom. She closed the small distance between them and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. He flinched for a second, surprised. Then his own arms came around her, holding her tight, as if he would never let go. He breathed in the scent of her hair, something simple and clean, like vanilla and home. "I thought I lost you," she sobbed into his coat. "Never," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "You are not losing me. I am home." A small voice came from the doorway. "Are you staying for good this time?" They broke apart to see Leo standing there, his small face a mixture of hope and apprehension. He was clutching the green crayon he had used to draw Julian's coat. Julian knelt, so he was eye level with the boy. "Yes, Leo," he said, his voice steady and sure. "If you and your mum will have me, I am staying for good." Leo's face broke into a radiant smile. He launched himself at Julian, wrapping his small arms around his neck in a fierce hug. "Good," he said, "our family needs a dad." Julian hugged him back, a profound, healing warmth spreading through him, chasing away the last of the shadows. Over Leo's small shoulder, he met Ilara's tear-filled, smiling eyes. He was not a ghost, he was not broken, he was a man who had been lost and who, at a cold bus stop on a winter's night, had finally been found. Months later, the last of the snow had melted, giving way to the tentative green of spring. They stood at that same bus stop, though they had not arrived by bus. Julian's car was parked at the curb, the door open. He was not wearing his heavy dark overcoat, but a simple jacket, the color of a spring sky. He carefully adjusted the rainbow scarf around Leo's neck. "Ready for the park, little lion?" Leo nodded enthusiastically, his eyes bright with excitement. Julian then turned to Alara. She was watching him, a soft, loving smile on her face. He reached out and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. The chill was gone from the air. But more importantly, it was gone from him. In its place was a warmth that came from within, a steady, burning flame that he knew would never go out. He leaned in and kissed her. A slow, gentle kiss, filled with all the promises he had made and intended to keep. It was a kiss that tasted of new beginnings and happily ever afters. "My mum is warm," Leo announced to a passing pigeon, his voice full of satisfaction. Julian and Alara broke their kiss, laughing. He looked at her, his eyes full of a love so deep it was bottomless. He looked at the boy who had saved him with a simple question, and he knew with uncertainty that settled deep in his soul that he was finally, truly home.